Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, and Rainbow Six. These are some of the examples of gaming franchises that were once on top of the world, but over time lost their audience and came crashing back down. However, if we look at these three franchises, what's shared between them is Ubisoft. Ubisoft, once the symbol of innovation in the industry, has become what represents industry mismanagement. It takes a true miracle for a gaming company to lose almost 90% of its stock value in just over 6 years. Now, what caused this failure and how did Ubisoft get here? Today we're going to be looking at everything that's happened to cause Ubisoft's downfall, what we can learn from it, and where we know it's heading. Hi, my name is Digital Dispatch, and after 10 years of working in the gaming industry, I decided to make this channel to give you a keen insight as to what's actually going on in the gaming industry and not just some YouTube drama. Today, we're going to be examining the deserved downfall of Ubisoft. Believe it or not, Ubisoft was once the superpower of gaming. Whenever Ubisoft was going to launch a game, we knew we had a treasure in our hands. From a $10 billion company in 2020 to a struggling company with debt in 2024. Ubisoft's finances are a huge indication of the kind of failure they have. So as of 2024, Ubisoft has accrued a total of 1.4 billion euros in debt, 880 million of that being just this year. The reason for it? Well, there are a lot of reasons for that, but generally it tends to go back to the same issue. They have had really terrible management. And I'll explain why closer to the end of the video, because there is a conspiracy that no one is actually talking about, but is obvious if you've worked in the gaming industry before. Now, wouldn't you know it, because of all their microtransactions, their net booking value has actually dropped. And net bookings are basically the kinds of things they sell, so whether that be game sales and game purchases, subscriptions, pre-orders, or any other service they sell like merch. Overall, Ubisoft has had a clear indication that they are not retaining their audience. Now, this is pretty sad to hear considering the kind of traffic the Ezio trilogy brought in, and even the adjustments like Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, these were massive titles, but they messed up horribly within their management, and we'll jump into that. It also looks like Ubisoft is trying to fail at this point because of their reliance on live service gaming. Live service gaming is the worst idea possible when it comes to gaming. It is hated very deeply, and to have a game that's single player, usually, be live service, indicates that there is zero value to be provided here. Unless there is a reason, and a good reason other than sharing pictures on games, for it to be a live service game, it should not be that in the first place. Otherwise, if you have a poor internet connection, or just overall don't want to play online for security reasons, you're going to miss out on game features. And with all of those factors coming together, we've seen the stock price plummet to the lowest it's been in decades. And for that reason, you're going to hear a lot about analysis downgrading Ubisoft for long-term viability, which basically means Ubisoft is expected to go bankrupt. Believe it or not, all of that information is not even the worst reason to invest into Ubisoft. For investors looking to invest in Ubisoft, they have to be careful from the Guillemot family. Now, this is a family that actually founded Ubisoft. It was 5 brothers from this family, including the CEO of Ubisoft. And the reason here is this family holds a significant share value. It is 15 to 18%, but because of the way their share structure works, they tend to make all the final decisions. So any strategic decision that comes out of Ubisoft has probably been approved by this family and is not just the investors and the shareholders voting. And the reason that investors find it difficult is that typically the Guillaume family's dominance shields them from any accountability for poor decisions, so they can't exactly get fired as investors pretty easily. And for this reason, it makes it very hard for shareholders to push for positive changes within the company. Moving on, the Guillaume, I'm going to stop saying their name, but that family does not like buyouts. They're very resistant to buyouts. So for example, in 2018, Ubisoft fought off a hostile takeover attempt by Vivendi. However, we say Ubisoft fought it off. It was actually these shareholders, the Guillemot family, that actually wanted to remain independent. A lot of shareholders at the time did want to go for a buyout, and it made sense to do so. And now, lately, we've been hearing rumors of a 10-cent buyout, but this one is actually more complicated. But what we're seeing from analysts is that odds are the family will also refuse this buyout, plummeting Ubisoft down a very dark hole. And this family doesn't just make terrible financial decisions, they also have a lot of controversies. For example, yes, Ubisoft was among the pioneers of open world gaming. However, the family has decided that all of their games will rely heavily, not all, but mostly, if not all, of their games would rely heavily on the open world model, which is a model model that a lot of people have come to love and hate at the same time because they make it nice, it's a good open world, but they make it too repetitive. And then if you've been following Ubisoft over the past 2 to 3 years, you will see that there were a lot of harassment scandals that went on, and they were mishandled extremely terribly, and I'll jump into that in the end because that is actually one of the reasons for their major downfall. And then finally, their live service strategy. They will just stick to it, and they're willing to die on that hill even though it is a hill not worth fighting for. And because of this, you're seeing a lot of shareholders now protest, but they're holding their stock and they're hopeful that they can convince this family to switch leadership, which I don't think will happen based on my experience in the gaming industry. With that being said, a lot of shareholders are also calling for Ubisoft to go private and to stop public investing so they can have better control over what's going on, and so that they can restructure it in the way it's governed as a company to make sure it's actually profitable again and not just an in-debt machine at this point. Now there's another culprit to this failure, Tencent, believe it or not. So back in 2022, Tencent actually became the largest single shareholder with a stake of roughly $300 million in Ubisoft. Now this is an issue because the company that's looking to buy out Ubisoft now is also Tencent. And what you won't hear from people is, remember during the Ubisoft scandal when Ubisoft started firing a bunch of people, a lot of them being managers and creative directors. For example, the creative director of Assassin's Creed Origins, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and at the time Assassin's Creed Valhalla was among the people fired. Who hired these people? Tencent, which actually gives me the indication that Tencent had this planned all along. They bought a large stake so they could make decisions. They purposely may have or may not have, this is not defamation, this is just speculation, they may have pushed poor decision making on purpose to make the stock a lot cheaper to eventually force a sell of Ubisoft's IP, at least, if not the company. Now, when we talk about Ubisoft selling IP, imagine a Chinese Ubisoft. No. Now, when we talk about selling IP, you're going to have to start to think of gaming as a Chinese industry. Now, there were a lot of indicators that China was anti-gaming in the past, but with games like Black Myth Wukong and studios like the developers that made the game, we can see that China now has a very forced push towards dominating the gaming sector with moves like this. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. I don't think so. I think if we get a fresher look to Assassin's Creed, like a Chinese Assassin's Creed, or at least Chinese funded Assassin's Creed, we might actually get a really solid game. But again, what do I know? However, going back to the topic of the investors, Ubisoft has been a very, let's call it, politicized company. They have had extremely left-leaning ideologies pushed down their throat, which is kind of hilarious considering Tencent's ownership of the company. This isn't exactly what you would get for a company of this sort. However, that might also be a part of their strategy because every company that's, for lack of a better term, gone woke has gone broke. And maybe that's what they're going for because their end strategy was just to buy the IP. Now with Ubisoft, it's not just the financials that are failing, but the games as well. So let's talk about the most recent and most violent game failures that are destroying Ubisoft's reputation. For the first major failure that we saw recently was Star Wars Outlaws, with extremely mixed gameplay reviews and in-game clips showing the issues that they were having, clunky AI, repetitive mechanics, but it was actually hyped to be Ubisoft's flagship game for 2024. Of course, knowing that they're going to delay Assassin's Creed Shadows. At the time, they were praising it for the visuals, but when you got into that game, the gameplay was very shallow, uninspired, and the mission structure was absolute trash. They did release it back in August 2024, but they did not even mildly meet sales expectations. Now, this isn't exactly proven because Ubisoft hasn't come out with this information, but analysts are speculating that it didn't even cover costs. So the costs were expected to be around $150 million. They didn't even make that back. And the major issue with it was, again, they were sticking to their open world model. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good model. They just like to do it wrong. Star Wars wasn't meant to be open world. I don't think it ever will be a successful, good open world Star Wars game, in my personal opinion. But the fact that they try to force this model down just because they own the IP is going to be a huge issue for them. Moving on, the major recent failure of XDefiant. If you've been following the news recently, they have actually announced that they will stop the servers for this game and basically discontinue it completely. Now, XDefiant was a free game, so it's not exactly an issue. So the XDefiant, funny enough, was only released in May. So in under a year, this game has managed to fail as a free game. It was supposed to be like a Call of Duty Valorant competitor. They had a lot of issues with this game, primarily around the fact that it was was not balanced whatsoever. Now, again, this is usually fine within the first year of a game, as long as they adjust pretty quickly. They weren't even updating the game, the updates were terrible, and I'm assuming that's because there was a very small player base within just weeks of the release of the game, so they figured why burn any more money. They did announce the shutdown this month, so December 2024, and the servers will be going offline, I believe, right before the summer of 2025. Now, when it came to the fans, they also kind of agreed with this statement, because why would you want to invest in a dying game? And then what Ubisoft CEO called a quadruple A game, Skull and Bones, the biggest joke of the 21st century. Now, Skull and Bones was actually announced in 2017. It was delayed more than 6 times because of all the work they wanted to put into it, but it finally launched later in 2024, so pretty recently as well, and had extremely overwhelmingly negative reviews. It had an open world that was excruciatingly empty. There was nothing to do in the game, and Ubisoft did something that it's been doing for a while, but it gets more obnoxious over time, which is the fact that it makes it so grindy to get resources just to artificially inflate the duration of the game or the lifetime of the game. They still have not learned from their Assassin's Creed 2 days of collect the feathers, but apparently it's a model they want to continue following. And because it was announced in 2017, it is rumored that they didn't do a lot of work on the graphics, and for that reason, when you played it, it played like a 2017 game. It did not in any way, shape, or form look like a game that was set for 2024. And funny enough, and I don't understand why the delays happened, I'm assuming mismanagement and people quitting, because that's very common for Ubisoft based on their in-work culture, but it was basically a really terrible Black Flag, which, if you've played Black Flag, was an amazing game, but they ended up firing the creative director for that, but let's not talk about that right now. And because of the delays as well, and this is something they got to be careful of for Assassin's Creed Shadows, people just lost interest. You're not supposed to delay a game. You're not exactly GTA for you to delay this game 6 times after it being announced in 2017. And now moving on to something we hope and pray to God that is not a failure. It is Assassin's Creed Shadows. Now, Assassin's Creed Shadows was destined to be launched in November 2024. It was in fact the gift I asked my wife for my birthday, but now it's been delayed to February 2025. And do I think it will be delayed again? Yes, it will be. I do not believe they will launch it. I think we will hear about a delay very soon because the backlash is immense on this game. Now, there are rumors that initially the character of the samurai in the game was supposed to be an actually well-known samurai. However, they decided to change it and play the race game on that, which isn't exactly a good idea if you're trying to portray the society properly. Beyond that, they actually ended up being completely insensitive to the history of Japan and the nuclear bombs that were dropped in Japan after their surrender in World War II. This is because Ubisoft took a symbol of Japan's resilience to the nuclear bombings and turned it into merch. Believe it or not, the Ubisoft team did actually go to Japan to gain a lot of insight into the culture behind this, but clearly being the kind of company it is and the extremely left-leaning politics that they carry, they could not find in their hearts the ability not to be insensitive towards the death of hundreds and thousands of people. Moving on, we can actually kind of tell that the storytelling is going to be very weak because all they wanted to focus on for Assassin's Creed Shadows was agendas and more political agendas. Finally, funny enough, they did rush the development to hit financial targets, and learning from the lesson of their previous games, it's not exactly a good idea, which is why I actually think it's going to be delayed again. And when they delayed it, the joke that Ubisoft said was, we want to ensure the best experience for players. You can just tell us. We knew it was supposed to get delayed. It was obviously going to get delayed. There were so many issues. And then the changing of Yasuke to be, well, the samurai character that they then made into Yasuke, which did exist, didn't exist, really unknown. It was actually a journalist that wrote him into history, and like, it's a complicated issue. Just don't do it. Maybe like, if you care about representation, appropriation, maybe just represent the people as themselves, right? Nope, they had to put race into this game because, again, Ubisoft. And this one hurts a lot because I am a huge fan of the Assassin's Creed franchise. I've played every single game since 2007, and it sucks to see them do this to something that I basically grew up on, but, you know, lefties companies got it left. With that said, there were more failures, but this is just about the most recent ones. Now, based on these recent failures, one of two things will happen. Either Ubisoft will adjust their direction, or they will continue down this dirty path, and we're going to see them get sold to Tencent, and then finally, we'll see a good Assassin's Creed game come out again. And now, what the public likes to deem the biggest indications of Ubisoft failure is closing studios and layoffs. Now, these were aggressive, but let's be very clear, this year was a big and bad year for a lot of people, so it wasn't just them. If we're going to go by layoffs alone, we're going to have to say that basically every company around the world is failing, at least every major company, which isn't exactly bad news, but it is also an indication of the global market, because if you've heard the news about Ubisoft's move, for example, for Assassin's Creed Shadows, more than half the team has never made a game before. So that is going to be extremely scary, and that's why I think it's going to get delayed again, because a lot of issues doing that. But when you come to this kind of direction where they're trying to train newbies on how to make games, you're going to face a lot of these issues, and then that explains the closures and layoffs, because basically devs are now too expensive. Now, when it came to their major closures in 2024, they did have a San Francisco office closure, which was a big office, and the Osaka office, funny enough, the one in Japan, and their workforce is rumored to have been reduced by at least 1,600 employees, which is a huge layoff considering the kind of company Ubisoft is. Now, some of this is rumored to be the X-Defiant closing down, and then the Crew closing down as well, stopping their servers, which they're getting sued for, by the way, but that's a topic for a different day. But yes, because the job of the San Francisco branch was to handle the live service games, so basically X-Defiant at this point. Now, when Ubisoft was asked about these, they did say they were reallocating resources, which basically means we're going to fire a bunch more. Now, there were also protests in other Ubisoft headquarters, most notably France, but the sentiment is pretty low among employees. The culture is very leftist. If you go into the Ubisoft employee portal, you'll see that they do have their own programs where they fund people that feel too emotional. It has become an absolute joke of a company, and this is all under the eyes of the Guillemot family, but it's interesting to see how leftist Ubisoft can go before it completely buckles, which it kind of already has. And then it doesn't even stop there. There are a lot of legal issues and public relations issues going on with Ubisoft, so they have a class action lawsuit filed against them for the Crew and the servers being shut down. So when you buy a CD or when you buy a game in general, you don't expect that game to one day be shut down. So that is something a lot of people don't know, is actually when you buy a game, you are not buying the rights to play that game all the time, which gives a case to piracy, but we're not talking about that. That is a crime. Don't do it. I am not going to jail for you. But yes, when companies like Ubisoft make games, apparently you don't actually own the game. You're just paying for the right to play the game until they feel like you shouldn't play the game anymore. With that said, on to a more fun topic that'll definitely get me demonetized, so please subscribe. But the DEI, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion controversy around Ubisoft. So their DEI initiatives are absolutely disgusting at this point. Like, I don't know why anyone would want to work with Ubisoft. I definitely won't ever consider going down that path. And the reason for it is it's because there's zero leadership when it comes to so-called sensitive topics. It's no longer about human beings being human beings. It's now an issue of politics. And because of that, what Ubisoft fails to imagine is the world isn't exactly Western Europe and Canada and the US. The world is much wider than that. And because of these sentiments, especially the DEI ones and the more, let's call them liberalized ideologies, and I know not all liberals think like this, but it's the loud ones that do. Because of these, I actually don't expect to see a Ubisoft in 5 years, at least not like the one we have today. It will either A, shift completely, at which point they will definitely rebrand, so the name Ubisoft will disappear, or B, get sold to Tencent, and then Tencent's going to be making all these amazing games. And now having been in this industry for this long, I can tell you Ubisoft is definitely going to go bankrupt. There is no coming out of this, especially because their structure hasn't exactly changed. And people don't change their mind, they just die and new people come in. Now, it's not just me talking, but analysts are actually saying Ubisoft's going to go bankrupt in 2025. I don't see it happening that quickly. I would say maybe 2 to 3 years from now, but if it goes bankrupt next year, it's good and bad news, but I guess we'll have to find out. The reasons for this, now when the analysts talk about it, it's all the ballooning debt, like I mentioned, most of it in 1 year, which is disgusting as a company of this size. They have ongoing litigation, their sales are dropping and dropping even more, which pushes them really hard into a buyout. Now, I do hope this buyout goes through, because at this point, Ubisoft has proven that they don't know what the hell they're talking about or doing. But if Tencent was to take take over this, we would finally have good games moving on to the future. Games with story, games with actual volume to them, and games that aren't just fetch missions. But let me know what you think. I'm interested to know. If you work in the industry, of course, I would really value your opinion, but let me know, based on your experience, where is Ubisoft headed in 2025? And we will keep track of this and of your predictions to see who gets it right. This has been Digital Dispatch, and I wish you all the best.